Welcome to this explainer. Today, we're diving into a genuinely fascinating paradox. We're going to look at two men from completely opposite ends of the intellectual spectrum who somehow both agree on one incredibly provocative idea. You do not actually have free will. So, let's take a deep dive into the forces, both physical and metaphysical, that shape, quite literally, every choice you make.
Okay, here's our roadmap for today. We'll start with the delusion of choice, then explore the programmed mind and chemical compliance. After that, we'll pivot over to universal salvation, the logic of true freedom, and finally, we'll synthesize the whole shebang using Plato's cave. Let's dive right in.
Section 1. The delusion of choice, or the illusion of autonomy. Let's start by challenging the very foundation of how you make decisions every single day.
So, do you actually have free will? It's a question that has plagued philosophers for centuries, right? But today, we aren't dusting off ancient texts. We're looking at two modern thinkers who argue that your daily choices, your likes, your dislikes, and even your ultimate destiny are largely just an illusion. They're suggesting the control panel to your life simply isn't in your hands. Now, the two sources we're unpacking today literally couldn't be more different. On one side, we have Jason Christoff, a health and self-sabotage analyst. He focuses on what we can call horizontal freedom, basically the earthly battle of man versus biological and social systems. And on the other side, we have David Bentley Hart, a highly academic theologian exploring vertical freedom. He argues that our main barrier isn't physical at all, but an internal ignorance of our metaphysical source. It's about looking up rather than just looking around.
Moving to Section 2. Christoff and the Programmed Mind, Engineering the Subconscious.
Let's examine Christoff first. His thesis suggests we live in a society totally governed by soft mind control techniques. He points out that a staggering 95% of human behavior is driven by the subconscious mind. And the catch here? The subconscious doesn't have a logic filter. It simply accepts whatever is repeated to it. Christoff argues that our modern environment is practically engineered to exploit this vulnerability. Through media and screens, our brains are forced into what's known as an alpha state. In this hypnotic frequency, your logical, critical mind is bypassed completely. This makes us incredibly susceptible to predictive programming and corporate messaging without us even realizing it. You think you're just kicking back and watching a movie, but Christoff argues your hard drive is actively being programmed.
And he points out that this programming starts super early. He looks at the Prussian model of education as the literal factory for this social engineering. You've got Pavlovian bells conditioning children to ignore biological cues. You've got segmented learning breaking down holistic thinking. Age segregation enforces intense peer pressure. And it all leads to standardizing the human mind. The ultimate goal, he argues, is to break down a child's natural, inquisitive spirit to create a totally compliant, predictable adult.
All right, Section 3. Chemical compliance and sovereignty. Using toxins as a control mechanism.
Now, Christoff doesn't stop at media and schooling. He makes his fascinating leap by arguing that your physical health is directly linked to your mental autonomy. Basically, you cannot have a free mind in a chemically compliant body. What's really interesting here is how he sees everyday chemicals working together in a calculated synergy. He views fluoride as the pacifier, meant to induce docility and calcify your intuition. On the flip side, he views your daily caffeine habit as the anxiety engine, locking the brain into a constant fight-or-flight state. Together, they create what he calls the perfect slave frequency, leaving people physically exhausted yet mentally wired and anxious. It makes the population incredibly easy to manage.
So how do we get out of this? Well, to reclaim what he calls biological sovereignty, Christoff advocates for a complete manual overwrite of this lifelong programming. This involves strict information hygiene, like doing a 30-day media fast, right alongside a physical protocol. We're talking drinking distilled water to avoid fluoride, totally detoxing from caffeine to reset the nervous system, and utilizing mirror work to consciously force empowering data back into your subconscious.
So Christoff gives us this really compelling look at the external forces trying to hijack our will. But what if the barrier to your freedom isn't actually external at all? This brings us to a massive pivot in our explainer. We're moving away from the biological threats of the physical world and stepping right into the grand cosmic theology of our second thinker, who suggests the real threat to freedom is entirely inside us.
That brings us to Section 4, Hart's universal salvation argument, dismantling eternal torment. Enter David Bentley Hart. In his deeply philosophical work, Hart argues that the traditional Christian concept of eternal damnation is mathematically, logically, and morally impossible.
He posits instead that universal salvation, the idea that every single soul will eventually be reconciled to God, is an absolute inevitability. He builds this meticulous case on 4 foundational meditations. First up, metaphysically. If God created everything out of absolutely nothing, a permanent hell would mean God's creation ultimately failed, which would make him a moral monster. Second, scripturally. He argues ancient texts describe judgment as a temporary, refining fire, not some permanent torture chamber. Third is the anthropological angle. Humanity is entirely interconnected. You couldn't possibly be perfectly happy in hell if someone you love is suffering. And finally, logically, which brings us to his absolute most striking point about human choice.
Section 5, the logic of true freedom, where choice is born of delusion. The absolutely crucial point here is how Hart completely redefines the very concept of what it means to be free.
See, we usually think of free will as the ability to choose literally anything, even our own destruction. Hart says, actually no, that is completely backward. Choosing eternal suffering over infinite bliss isn't freedom, it's a symptom of a disordered, ignorant, or literally insane mind. For Hart, true freedom is the capacity to realize one's ultimate good, meaning any truly rational mind, once stripped of all its worldly ignorance, will inevitably and freely choose God.
If God is the good creator of all, he is the savior of all, without exception. That brilliantly illustrates Hart's view that freedom isn't some horizontal battle we fight against elites or chemicals. Instead, it's a teleological journey, a path driven toward an ultimate, inevitable end goal. It's a journey where God patiently clears away all your internal impediments and delusions until the truth becomes completely irresistible. You don't earn this freedom. You eventually just wake up to it.
Finally, Section 6, Synthesis. Let's bring it all together using Plato's cave.
Despite having radically different targets, notice this really unexpected alignment here. Christoff is the pragmatist, right? He's fighting external controllers for individual biological sovereignty. Hart is the ontologist, fighting internal ignorance for universal metaphysical unity. Yet both of them impartially point out that what you currently consider your free will is heavily, heavily compromised. Whether it's a chemical straitjacket or a spiritual delusion, your choices right now are not fully your own.
If we anchor this whole thing in the famous metaphor of Plato's cave, the synergy is just beautiful. Christoff is the rebel sitting beside you in the dark, urging you to stop drinking the poisoned cave water, warning you that the shadows on the wall are just a hypnotic media flicker rate, and telling you to manually climb your way out. Hart, on the other hand, is the philosopher calmly assuring you that the very fact you can even perceive a shadow proves there is a light behind you, and that light is so magnetically good it will inevitably draw you and everyone else out of the cave eventually. So this leaves us with a pretty profound realization. Whether you lean toward the idea that your mind is restrained by external chemical compliance and social engineering, or by finite spiritual delusion and internal ignorance, the illusion of total control is entirely shattered. The real question we have to ask ourselves is, what steps are you going to take today to uncover the truth of your own programming? Are you fighting to protect your chains, or are you finally ready to step into the light?